We are coming back in a big step to AI, the consequences. We'll now be talking in depth about chatbots, about possibilities in technology and how that can pay to your businesses. Let's talk about machine learning, automated journalism, localization, intention management with these wonderful people. I'm very happy now to welcome on stage. First is Johann Åhlund. He's a natural language interaction entrepreneur and a domain expert. He was the founder of Artificial Solutions. So I'm very happy to have you here from Sweden.
You.
Then we have Dr. Markus Peschl. He's professor in the field of cognitive science and innovation, and he's the founder of Living Core Innovation and Knowledge Architects. Very happy to have you here from Vienna. And then, too good, she was born in Ireland, but she's half now. Can I say Polish? No.
No,
but she was
half, if anything, Hungarian.
If half, if anything, Hungarian. But she's the founder of the Singularity University Warsaw chapter. So she has extensive experience in publishing sector and in corporate innovation, methods and thinking. Before, I had a first question for this half-an-hour panel, but I skip it. I want to start with the first question to you, all three of us. You have been sharing this morning with us. What was the most challenging question you are biting your teeth on from this morning, or the most challenging idea you think that has exactly to do with what we are talking about?
I think the
Margaret,
so if I start, the gentleman, thank you. I think the question is AI and time, because what I feel is with the artificial intelligence is going to be the equivalent of a utility that's going to totally transform our industry. I'm a publisher for 25 years in emerging markets in multiple languages, and I feel that we're underestimating the fact that we own the space of content when we don't, and that there are other companies out there that aren't even here that are going to be faster to market than we will be even in our dreams, and what will be the implications of that for our industry as a whole, and what will be the future for our editorial in that environment.
Markus.
Yes, for me, I think I was a little bit missing, everybody's talking about chatbots, technologies, and these kinds of things, but I was missing, where does the content actually come from? So is it just fact-based, or is it like, machine content? Nobody really talked about it, and I hope that perhaps we will talk about it. What is the role of content, and where does it come from, and how can it be innovative, not only via channels, but also, content-wise. So content-wise.
Content, role of content. Johann.
Yes, I'm seeing, more than a challenge, I see a fantastic opportunity. I've been working with natural language interaction since 2001, so one of the pioneers, and initially a lot about automating customer service. But now I'm seeing the interest and the first steps being taken in the content industry about offering proper interactive content. And then I don't mean these so-called chatbots that are really clickbots, but where the
How do you differentiate that? Can you please explain for a second?
Most of the so-called chatbots out there are actually clickbots. You don't interact with words. You don't have a natural language interaction. You're being served information, and you might click yes or no or tell me more. But proper natural language interaction, what we can do today is to allow the users to, in their own words, either say or write what they want. Oh, tell me more about that person. Why is this important, and so on. And I see based on, and actually I'm surprised, positively surprised about how far the industry seems to be, at least in the thought process around this. That it's absolutely ready for the proper interactive content, and I think we will talk more about that later.
Absolutely. Sticking for the idea of content for a minute. Margaret, maybe you can join first. What is core? How do we have to rethink content? Where do we have to rethink it disruptively? And where do we have to go back to the roots where we came from 100 years ago? So maybe you can draw a full image.
Let's start with the root, because I think that's where the real origin of the opportunity lies. I think the origin of the opportunity lies in truth, authenticity, and curation. And the opportunity lies in using technology to eliminate the final boundary of geography, language, and legacy infrastructure. If I look at the opportunity of combining, for example, our capabilities in content creation as editors with the technical capabilities of the localization industry, for example, which is the area that I'm particularly interested in, then what you're looking at is a female-led industry on both sides. you're looking at lovers of language on both sides, but where it bifurcates is that in our industry as publishers, our editors are locally minded, not performance-oriented, and not technology-enabled. I mean, technology is an obstacle to creativity in the publishing industry largely. And then in the localization industry, you've got this brilliant, let's say, multilingual capability where you have globally minded, technology-enabled, performance-driven women who are lovers of language, who need content creation. So I see this brilliant opportunity, but I also see a lot of the burden of legacy ways of doing business, particularly when it comes to geography and language.
Okay. Markus, do you want to join in to the question?
Yes, I think, connecting on what I was saying, I think if you look at classical AI, it's called machine learning, neural network stuff, I think what they're doing is, on the one hand, they are like problem solving. So, from a theoretical perspective, sorry guys, but I have to, you have to be aware of what we are doing here. On the one hand, you have a problem space, and you try to solve a problem within this space. But I think, and now we're coming back to the content side, if you're a publisher, what you want is you want to create new problem spaces. So that's what we would call, or perhaps you would call, like setting new trends, showing new paths, giving a new vision. And I think that is something which machines yet can't do. And I doubt whether they can do it, because it has something to do with quality, it has something to do with purpose, it has something to do with really like an internal intention which has to be created anew.
And values.
Of course, I think that's included in the purpose. Yes, thank you. And I think that's something which we really have to think about. And I also think, in the talk before, our discussion here, that's exactly the point where you have, on the one hand, the AI stuff, which really helps you in the routine things, but the real creative things, like creating purpose, creating new content, creating novelty, is very much about what humans can or should do. And I think if we talk about, editors should be made, give some more free time to do their work, I think that's the work which has to be done. And I think also this needs completely new skills, but perhaps we can talk about it a little bit later.
Come back to the skills. Let's talk tech for a moment.
Yeah.
Can you take us into natural language programmation, and what is really the advantage of what you are working on, talking content of the future?
Yes, try to keep it short now. A few things. One thing that we are focusing a lot on is we're actually not focused on shall we say, semantics and linguistics. We're focusing on the intention of the user. Because intention is something that actually goes across languages. If I want a cup of coffee, it's the same intention in any country. I will express it in different ways. So by building the solution based on intention, it actually makes it much easier to automatically translate not just the content, but the understanding capability into different languages. So that is one thing to think about. The other one, coming back to what I experienced from this morning, is I see a possibility of changing the way we consume content. Until now, it has been you read an article, if you have the patience, and as we know, our kids certainly don't have the patience anymore. They want short chunks of information that they can understand quickly, and if they have follow-up questions, they want that information directly. They have no time to wait for it. They don't have the energy to go looking for it themselves. So if we then think about what we try to do is we would try to somehow generate content in a more efficient way, perhaps not computer automated, but in a more efficient way. We want it across different languages. So the advantage of using content that is not just a long mass of text, but it is chunks of information where we expect and where we encourage an interaction with the user. So the user is kind of driving what content they are being fed with. They say, tell me more about that. Okay, I'm reading an article about the Russian election, and someone is mentioning some Viktor Zubovnik or whatever it's called. I say, so who's that guy?
So totally individualized, totally customer-centric, totally reduced
Absolutely.
to the individual,
but because that also allows, that also makes it easier to semi-automatically translate the content to different languages.
And create incredible data at the same time.
Absolutely. And of course, for the media company to create a relationship with the reader.
How far is tech already, for the last question to you in the moment, how far is tech already to really detect intentions, to take emotional sides of the coin into, so how far does the technology go?
Well, I mean, quite fun. Actually, they always talk about emotions because that sounds really sexy. No? But that part of the intention is great, it's good to have. No? But I think that just with the factual intention, we have reached really far. I mean, if we look at the existing so-called chatbots on either it's Facebook or Amazon or whatever, they are very, very poor examples of this technology. No?
Still, yeah.
Extremely, but they are clickbots, they're not chatbots. No? So the technology that is available, what I'm working with, for example, certainly allows us to build solutions that will allow proper interaction, that takes into account context, that takes into account the intention of the user.
So, I mean, how that combines is if you imagine the analog world of publishing, where our editors sit around and they're thinking, okay, what's the future emergent demand of our readers around, it could be pattern purchasing, it could be fashion purchasing, it could be selling a product on Etsy, whatever. The idea would be to visualize how an editor's life could be augmented if they actually had access to artificial intelligence, natural language interaction enabled editorial assistance. So, all of a sudden you can become a single person editorial. Or for a small publisher in Lithuania who wants to sell products from Lithuania in the US market, who doesn't have a scalable English language publishing solution, they could potentially go direct to market in a market that they wouldn't have the capacity to. So it's really about reinventing, but really doing things that are in the core. So the core remains the same, but you use technology to enable you to simplify the process and then get a route to market. And why is this important? I mean, if you don't mind me saying, it's if we look at the global industry of the digital single market, I mean, first of all, we're going to be losing 800 million jobs by 2030. Next, we are going to have the opportunity, if we can release the capability in technology, to get access to a 450 trillion euro annual market. And of course, for the EU, you have this digital single market initiative relating to long-tail languages. So it's really a social imperative for the European Union, for publishers, to really enable themselves by thinking differently and embrace, the alternatives for technology. And that's not going to come from us looking at each other here. If from the publishing industry, it's going to come from looking for affiliations from people and learning their languages of doing business that is very different to our native language of doing business in the publishing sector.
What was your biggest learning curve over the last year? Your personal learning curve?
So, not really.
The one you would share.
So I just finished a course in Stanford in corporate innovation, and it was a one-year program where everything I was doing was in the digital world with avatars, using digital platforms. And I consider myself to be a relatively capable person, but learning to communicate in a very multicultural, time irrelevant environment on these platforms, it's a new skill, a new pace of communication. I had to learn how to properly use my computer. I mean, on something very generic. I know it sounds ridiculous, but when you're using these tools, it's a very different way of doing business. And I think that's where the localization industry has a brilliant strength, because they have grown up technologically in parallel with the technology industry. Because if you were Microsoft, you needed to have your software translated into 100 languages. So they adapted indirectly as a consequence of their translation capabilities. Now, they have a demand from our global brands to create content as scalably as they can translate. So there is a demand. It's just that the translation industry can't create as well as we can, but we can't get access to a global market as quickly as they can, which is why you need to, partner in the outer realms and learn their narrative.
When I come back to the speak of Juan Señor this morning, as he said, charge your readers, charge them either with data or with dollars. Sticking with this idea, there is one currency in this realm for me, which is trust, and you named it earlier. What has to be discussed in this panel? How do we recreate or create more trust with the readers than in the past of the last years, where we focused very much on tech? and costs cutting, etc. So how to regain trust?
I would
Go ahead.
Okay. I would say, I think, the advertising model, as we had it in the publishing industry for, I don't know, the last 50 years or more, I don't know. So I'm not a specialist in editor, in publishing, but we have done a lot of publishing, projects with publishing companies. But I think this advertising model, that's what eroded trust in the end. And so the problem here for me is how could you regain it? And I think this has again something to do with content on the one hand, and on the other hand with creating communities, engaging communities around this high quality content. The question again about content is what kind of content? So it should be content, I think we heard it today, this morning, I don't know exactly, but what is relevant content? And that's the question. So that's what we have to think about. So it's not only about, reporting about facts. That's very easy because that can be done, by robots, by chatbots or whatever. That's very simple. Or reporting on numbers or trends, even patterns. But I think the interesting thing is, we as editors or as content creators have to be ahead of the time. The question, and that's exactly what at least to my understanding, and what also we try to do, and we had projects with publishing companies, we tried to make or establish a kind of attitude where a publishing company or editor is like a content innovator. So really creating content which is ahead of time so that it meets exactly at the right time, in the right place, the needs of the people. And I think that's interesting. But that's a real challenge because we are not used to learn these kinds of things, and we are not skilled to have these kinds of attitudes and empathic skills for the future.
How will tech help us to become this embracing the future creatures?
Sentiment analysis on one side, and basically, we always are, as editors and publishers, we're always ahead of the reader, always. But we made the mistake in following the digital model by actually worrying about what was trending now. So we actually pushed our editors back into the present, which I think was a fundamental mistake. I think we need to push our editors back into the future and get them to lead the debates, lead the trends, lead the discussions, show our readers tangible route forward, and particularly in the future for women, for example, as consumers or as educators or as mothers or as career, people, they need more now so than ever, tangible advice on how to proceed in this very disrupted world. So we as publishers and editors have a brilliant opportunity, but we need to bravely jump into the future, embrace new technology, and then move back to where we want our audiences to develop to. So I feel sometimes we're a little bit on the horse that's stagnant or not moving, but the pace is moving, and we think that the horse is moving, but it's actually just in a cart somewhere to the slaughterhouse. Sorry for the analogy, but I like to think of the publishing industry getting back on the racehorse that it is and was, and really moving at a very fast pace because all the capabilities are there. Actually, speaking from experience, having researched it now for the last year.
May I?
Yeah, and then Johann. Yeah, please.
Add one thing. I think we are now in a very critical and interesting situation. Because if you look at the development of what happened to Facebook and Google over the last 3 or 4 months, I think that's a big opportunities for publishers. Because what they did, they lost trust extremely. By all these political discussions, by this dopamine discussion. I don't know whether you have heard about this kind of, addictive, issues or addiction issues. And I think this is now exactly the right time for publishers to say, okay, regain what was your original value. And that at least to my understanding, is a real new opportunity to get up again.
Yes, I think that. With a kind of advertising, an ad-driven publishing industry, I think we have started to see the reader as a data point rather than as a reader that we want to build a relationship with. So I think that the publishing industry need to work harder at, of course we need the data points, we need advertising, of course, but the reader is first of all a reader that we need to create a trusted relationship with. I think that is, and then the rest can come after. And if we, or when we then serve them with ads of some kind, it has to feel relevant, and it can't feel creepy. And sometimes today it's like, ooh, they are watching me. Big Brother is watching me. I'm seeing this ad for this car, and I know why, because I was, but it doesn't feel relevant to me. I think we have to get away from that. Technology is great, but just because we can do something with technology doesn't mean that we should do it. It has to feel relevant, and we first of all need to build and maintain that trust factor with the reader.
Yeah, and in the morning, the narrative was a lot about help the reader to fulfill his dreams or something. So it's a different imperative behind this storyline. I take your questions. I go for your questions. Please raise your hands if you have a question. As long as I don't see anybody, I go further. Please, fifth, and I repeat it.
I'm just confused.
You're confused by what exactly? The whole subject. What are you confused by?
So, I'm a publisher. I have many brands across the globe.
You can take the mic.
Sorry?
Please take the mic.
I have many brands across the globe which are trusted. I have that trusted relationship that you're talking about. Now you want me to rely on a machine.
No.
No,
Not really. Can you
not.
please re-explain exactly that it doesn't become a slippery slope?
I'm just not getting it.
Okay,
Maybe
okay.
you need to go back and give me the kind of Janet and John.
Okay, where's the key?
What do I do?
So it's Haymarket, right? So,
Okay.
so
I'm sort of trying to speak, I think maybe other people in the room. 'Cause
Maybe you're not the only
where do
one.
we start? What do I do tomorrow?
What might he do differently tomorrow than today?
Nothing differently, I've got to start. So where do I start?
But I think, well, if you're not doing, well, I guess you're doing something with technology. Yes? In what way are you using technology today?
Well,
In your production process, shall we say? So how, in the way you are producing content, I assume you're using technology in some ways or the other.
no, I pay high quality journalists to write independent editorial. I don't ask a machine to write anything.
okay, I'd like to add, I mean, there are companies like Acrolinks and Ad Semantics, which you, if you don't know them, you really should. So maybe I throw the ball back. That there are companies that are actually creating machine-created content that would be comparable. I mean, you heard it earlier on, if you were looking at the Harvard Business Review conversation, you have to also think that 2 years from now, what's it going to look like? And yes, you will, needless to say, as a publisher, me personally, who loves print, who has worked with many brands and who is existentially concerned about the future of my own professional background as well, I look and I say, okay, who are the people not in the room that are most likely to further disrupt our industry? And there are companies there that are basically going to be making the content that you call highly trusted. And they are going to be able to do a reverse business model where they will do print on demand and they will be creating the brands of the future. So, I mean, this is where, I mean, we obviously, this conversation, we can't address it here in the 5 minutes. I'd be more than happy to discuss it tonight over a beer and share my thoughts really genuinely over what I think the steps are. But the first step is, if there was one piece of advice that I would give from a pure publisher's point of view, is if you're in English language, brilliant, because your route to a global market using localization capabilities is unlimited. You can really multiply your audiences and your commercial opportunities by digital reunification through multiple languages. So look at your global language strategy. Look at what are the alternatives 2-3 years down the road to support those other languages that you might want to be in. Imagine, so I'll just give an illustration. In the past, and this is a real illustration from Hearst, I used to publish Cosmopolitan. I know what the Cosmo brand book looked like. It took Helen Gurley Brown 40 years to get into 100 and something countries in 65 editions in 36 languages, 40 years. It took Kim Kardashian one very salacious night out, captured on video, and a social media channel to have an equivalent number of readers as Cosmo did at that time, which was 75 million. So the ability for technology to reach out and create engagement and influence is dramatic. Now, that was an obvious history point from the past. We've seen, the influences thereafter on political propaganda and computational propaganda, which is the big topic of the day. I mean, that's a step away from this equivalence in lifestyle. So my point would be, if assuming the global publishing industry model for licensing is finished, assuming that people want to maintain their presence in multiple languages in multiple countries, how are you going to do it if you don't have a local partner who can afford to pay for your licensing fee through advertising? How are you going to do it? That's the question. So what we're talking about is the answer for that moment when the disruption and the opportunity actually meets, when you should be looking at a multilingual strategy. So we'll talk about it afterwards, Rupert, if you want.
Thank you very much for your disruption. Do we have a kind of another sort of a question in that direction or in another direction? I'm happy to take it. Not for the moment. What should we else put onto the table and put into the picture in order to embrace the future from the tomorrow, to change the today? Do we have to talk about new leadership? Do we have to reorganize the offices? So what is core in order to create a culture where the human capacity of innovation and creativity is boosting?
I'll say very quickly, I mean, in my opinion, you go from having a linear mindset to an exponential mindset. And this is what was the brilliance behind the Singularity University conceptually. The marketplaces are global-minded. They're exponential. You know, they are driven by technology. Our mindsets are linear. We think today plus 10%, you know. And, you know, we have to realize that we have to drop a lot of... Huh?
In the end, this is exponential.
Not on Sundays.
Not on Sundays. And not if you have the old infrastructures. So that would be my comment on it. It's a different mindset, probably more in the niche and more globally minded.
How do we get to that mindset? What do we need to change in the outside in order to change the inside? Exceptionally.
Now, we might have a difference of opinion on this.
What do you mean by outside?
Yeah, what do we have to change? Do we have to talk about new leadership principles? We're lean leadership. Do we have to reorganizing our offices, changing the tables every day? So what should we have to discuss about?
I think
we had some examples this day about rethinking organization, reinventing it. So
I think, you know, it's a lot of things, you know. I think you have to start at the organization, understanding what is it actually about, and what, you know, what wants to emerge, you know, not only in the classical publishing realm. And I think you were asking about what are your biggest learnings from the last years. I think one of my biggest learnings was from the last years, not only in the publishing industry, but in many, many innovation projects which we have been in, that the classical, you know, core of what we understand by publishing or by producing whatever good is exploding in a moment when you introduce this kind of digital technologies. And I think that's a real challenge to understand what does publishing mean, or what does my publishing, you know, company mean in the future, and facing these digital things, but not only facing the digital approaches, but also facing like cultural changes, facing the whole, you know, changing surroundings with all the other, you know, stakeholders around me. And I just give you one example, so that, for instance, a publisher, by, I don't know, acquiring endless data, you know, really, if they do a good job on user data, it's not only about like the classical, I would say, demographic data, but really in-depth data, because you can get it from exactly these interactions which you're talking about. Then you have an extreme value for not only advertisers, but also for producers of goods. So you might change, or at least one part of your company might become a kind of, get some kind of consulting services for these producers. So I think that's these are potentials which are, at least to my understanding, really not even thought, you know, to the end yet. So that's organizational or business model wise. And I think another very important point is, of course, on the skill level. So what about your employees? You know, whom do you employ? Yeah? Of course, you always have the classical editors, you have the classical people doing good research, these kind of classical skills, but really go a little bit further and say, okay, what you want to have, and I think that was also in one of the presentations this morning, you have to have people who create user experiences of the future. Yeah? They are creating future semantic spaces where the user, your reader, finds him or herself. And this is a different kind of skill and a different kind of attitude than just writing articles. I don't know, sorry, it's not just, I know it's not just writing articles. I know that's very hard work. I'm a scientist, so I'm having hard work as well. But it's something else. And I think, for instance, this somehow includes like very empathic, user-centered thinking and design thinking, these kinds of things, for instance. So, but
yeah, nothing. I mean, there is no holy grail. You know, there's no magic wand. I wish we had one. I think it's really about starting to experiment. And anytime where there is new technology, it's easy to. I don't understand. What shall we do? How does this impact us? I mean, start experiment a little bit with it. I mean, don't make huge investment, but make sure you have partly the right people. You employ people that understand these new things, even if you do not understand it. No? And have them work with your classical team to experiment. I think that's really the only way to go forward.
There's another factor, I think, that's the geography question, because we very often get very limited by the geographic parameters, and we don't think beyond our existing marketplaces. And I think having the capability within the organization to streamline thought processes multiculturally is extremely important on a lean level. But let's see.
Any other question of you? Yes, please. The lady in the fourth row. Yes, you. Yes, you get a mic.
What types of tools or processes are available to us to help us discover the intention of the user, aside from what we're all doing, which is keyword research and delivering content accordingly, which is not in the future, I guess. We're not putting ourselves in the future. So how do we find the
Tools for discovering the intentions of the user.
One thing that what I'm working with is our natural language interaction platform, which is called Teneo, allows you to build solutions that can interact in a meaningful way with the user or with the reader. No? I think that's a fantastic way of really learning about them, because I mean, you can of course analyze how people click around on the website. You get can make some kind of conclusions from that. What article do they seem to read, and what article do they not read? No? Which banner did I click on, and which one do I not click on? But if you have a natural language interaction, you get their words. No? And from there, it's quite easy to pick the intention. See? So we're coming back to what I keep coming back to, I think, like trying to create more of a relationship with the reader, which is not just about that every now and then I sent an email with their comments. No, but I have an really interactive dialogue with them in real time.
In real time.
I think that is the key.
There are a number of companies in the sentiment analysis space. If you give me a card afterwards, I can send you some links.
just one other example. What we did, for instance, for one also publishing company is like a kind of user experience lab within their premises. So they invited readers, invited users, and it was a fashion, brand. And so they really talked to, they invited young girls and say, okay, come in here, we want to show you, new stuff or whatever. And by observing these young persons, they really learned so much. Afterwards we had an interview with the employees. We never had imagined what we learned just from this. I don't know. This took 4 or 5 hours, and they had stuff for the next year. Yeah. So it's in a way it's simple, but I think it takes it's a change of culture and attitude, which has to start first, and then I think there are endless opportunities.
What we would normally classically do in the analog editorial world, you'd have readers market research, and it's qualitative and quantitative, and that's very typical. And half of it you already know what you're trying to achieve anyway, and that's the result you get. And
you're buying it from external.
You're buying it from external.
Exactly.
But imagine a situation where, for example, your role is to capture that in the newly developed retail. When retail and e-tail are combined and people are looking to actually measure in-store experience. Because obviously the store of the future, the retail store of the future is going to be there not to sell, it's going to be there to generate an emotive experience and connection. So in that particular instance, who better to actually curate that than somebody who's an authority in fashion, for example, who can really understand how to connect, sell, and how to bring an experience alive in a store. I mean, it's not, the ex-CEO of Burberry is now at Apple. I mean, it's not by incidence or by chance that happened. You know, so I think that we need to look for unholy alliances with people who we have aligned interest with, but think very differently about how we provide services, common service to each other. Like what I was saying about localization, translation has always been a part of our business model, but we never looked at it as part of the value proposition. So, you know, same thing when it comes to, let's say, the extra lines of pictures that we used to take. Nobody thought about making a Pinterest out of that. So the question, I suppose I'm sitting here is, are we sitting here in the publishing industry having our Kodak moment that we're just missing the point? You know, sometimes I feel this is my 11th time coming here, because in fact the first one was you know, at CeBIT, you know, the year when Google said that they were going to scan in all of the books. And I remember all the CEOs of the publishing companies standing there absolutely outraged. I mean, we've kind of lost a lot of ground since then. So I think it's time to have that kind of come to Jesus moment and have a little real think about, okay, what's the core USP, the core value? I mean,
yeah, we had that in the morning already.
Yeah, and really get back down to that, because, you know, we are going through a period of unprecedented change. There is no better equipped people to help navigate through that than editors. You know, you just look at the Horizon 2020 and the European objectives, you know, for digital single market, it's a brilliant opportunity. The new trade relations with Japan, that's a brilliant opportunity. So, you know, I mean, there's so many things that we could be doing, but we need to think differently about what we're doing and our potential audiences and our potential commercial propositions around that. So,
thank you, Margaret. One very last question from you. If not, we sum it up. What would be for you the one sentence to take away for the rest of the day and tomorrow for our audience to stick with?
One sentence. Well, I truly believe in proper interactive content.
Okay, that's for sure. Markus, for you?
I truly believe in future-oriented content which is created side by side, you know, humans and machines.
And you, Margaret?
I believe brilliant content can transform people's lives for the better.
And one very last question from me. We had this word of being consumer-led in the present. What is absolutely core for you to really be 100% consumer-led, other than we are until today?
Look, I mean, look at Jen. I have 2 children who are non-consumers, and most of their friends are non-consumers. We're moving into an unprecedented period of decline in consumerism as a lifestyle choice. So, you know, if we want to actually make money in the future, we need to help brands make a definitive brand statement to get the consumer market initiated in wanting to buy into their brand story. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question very explicitly, but, you know, if we are moving away from the 800 tons or 800 million tons of clothing going into landfill. We're moving away from that model of consumption into, you know, very, very, let's say, lean, specific and very direct narrative on consumption, buying less, valuing more. So I think that's all opportunity, I mean, for us as publishers, if we capture the content creation model right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you three. Thank you very much for your insights.